Thank you, Antonio, for this very kind introduction, and good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. It's a great honor, and of course, it's also a great opportunity to introduce you some of the research, recent research that we are performing in the field of bio-inspired soft robotics, which is my area. And I would like to start exactly with the approach that we have. So first, we identify the biological system that we want to imitate for some specific functionalities, for some abilities. And then we try to translate by simplify, so it's not a copy, in a robotic solution for specific application. But because these robots are deeply based on bio-inspiration, biology, sometimes they can also be used as a platform to validate the hypothesis on the biological system that we take as a models. So the final goal is doing science and technology at the same time. And there are already many robots inspired by nature. We already seen a great example in the plenary talk, and for different tasks in the real world. So just to mention some of them, we have coordination, we have learning, we have manipulation, and in the case of manipulation in particular, in soft robotics, many of the soft robots are inspired by octopus. This is, you know, fascinating animals. They can, doesn't have any rigid skeleton, any rigid structure, so can bend in any direction. So it shows infinite degree of freedom. It distributed control, so most of the neurons are in the arm and not in the brain. And in particular, octopus was also the model that we selected some years ago in the Octopus project to propose a new paradigm in robotics, which was named, in fact, soft robotics. It's a new area that is growing very fast in the last years. And by instance, this robot can be defined as a system and devices that can dynamically interact with the environment and can also deform the body. They can interact in this way and can show inherent or structural compliance. So the compliance is very important, is a key point of this robot. And so the compliance can be given directly by the material, so we can use elastomers, gel, and so on, or compliance can be given by the geometry. So we talk about structural compliance. And what we can say is that there is a strict relation between soft robotics and bio-inspiration, because softness is a key feature of all the living beings at different degree, at different level, of course. And soft is important, for example, for a safe interaction with the environment. So these robots are intrinsically safe, are important for touch, for exploring the environment, of course. Can also be important for emotion, so very important for human-robot interaction. So there are many, many features that we would like to take from living beings and implement in our soft robot. But probably among the many of these features that we would like to imitate, one of the most important features is adaptation. So living beings can adapt to unstructured environments, can react to uncertain situation, can cope with this dynamically change. And this is exactly what we would like to implement in our robot. So adaptation is the key to survive. But if this is the point, are we sure that animals are the best living beings that we can imitate? Probably not, because plants can adapt to any environment. They can really colonize a harsh environment after disaster, after fire. They can start to grow, and then animals can, of course, survive in this environment. So we want to study, in fact, the plants, and in particular, the features that we want to imitate in our robot is the growing ability of this living system. Because despite the animals that they grow until they reach maturity and then they stop, plants can grow for the entire life. They show indeterminate growth. And doing that, they continuously adapt to the external environments. So they change their body, they really adapt the shape. So they show very high plasticity. So this is the secret. This is what we want to imitate. And we want to propose a new strategy of movement in robotics that is based on growing. And is not based on muscle, is not necessarily animal-like, but is based on these features of plants. And in fact, there are many movements that we can imitate in plants, because usually, of course, we cannot perceive directly the movement because they are too slow. So we need to accelerate the movement. But they move following or escaping from environmental stimuli, what is called in biology tropism, that could be positive or negative, depending by the target. And also, they can show very fast movement, especially in carnivorous plants that need to be faster than the animal that they eat. And so this is the case of Dionamus scipola, the Venus flytrap, that closed the leaves in less than 1 second. So they can perceive the environment. They have a distributed sensing capability. They can also communicate, and this is very important. They can communicate with other plants, especially when they are in dangerous situations, or with animals, or with bacteria, fungi. And all these features, so this distributed control, intelligence, perception, and movement by growing, is what we try to implement in our robot as well. So, in particular, our model at plant grow, and the root apparatus, because we want to develop an autonomous robot that move inside the soil for soil exploration, for monitoring agriculture. And roots are the best living system adapted to the soil, because they can face this very dangerous and extreme environment where pressure and friction very high in few centimeters, because they grow at the tip level. So they add the cell, then absorb water from the environment by osmosis, and the only part that is moving soil is the tip. The rest of the body doesn't move with respect to the soil, so there is no friction. And at the tip level, they also have a perception ability, so they can perceive touch, humidity, gravity, they can avoid obstacles, and so on. And they can also produce this network, so they explore the soil in a capillary way. And what we are trying to investigate and understand if there is a communication on the apexes, so it's a sort of swarm intelligence inspired by root in this case, to reduce the energy needed for the exploration. And so implementing new algorithms that are inspired by this behavior. So this is a schematic view of the plant root. As I said, there is a meristematic region in which we have the cell division, then this elongation by osmosis. And root shows different strategy to be more effective and efficient in soil penetration. They also enlarge the diameter. They produce lateral hairs for anchoring the soil, very similar to lumbricus, in fact, because the physics is the same and affects root and animals without legs in the same way. And they also produce continuously dead cell, so they create a sort of interface, and then they move inside this interface, again, to reduce the friction. And the first prototype that we developed is, in fact, inspired by this lathing mechanism. So it's a hollow shaft with a soft skin that is pulled by metallic cable. And what we obtain is an elongation from the tip. So what we observe is a device that can open the soil and push in the soil and be very effective in the movement. We also introduce in the skin soft hairs, and we observe that these soft hairs help, in fact, in the movement. So this kind of device could be used, for example, for medical application, because this elongation from the tip doesn't create any damage to the tissue. But because our idea was to develop a device for soil, what happened with this system is that after a while, after a few centimeters moving soil, the system collapsed. Because we reduce the external friction by using the skin, but not the internal friction. So when the pressure increases, the skin, in fact, is stopped. So think about the solution. We really realized that the key is the growing. So we need to add material also in our robot. So we need to grow in soil. And so for the first time, we develop a robot that is able to grow. by adding material. So it's a sort of additive manufacturing approach in which the robot creates its own body layer by layer. So it's a layer by layer deposition. And so this is possible because inside the tip there is a motor that pulls a filament in a spool and gears that allow the perfect deposition of the filament in contact with the tip. So again, the only part that is pushing soil is the tip, and the rest of the body doesn't move, so there is no friction. So this is very effective for vertical penetration in soil. But what we did, we tried to compare, also understand why the plant root do the same. So we know that they grow at the tip level, but there are no quantitative data. So what we try to do is compare two systems. One is pushed from the top, the other one is growing at the tip level, and then we compare the performance. And what we register is that the system that grows at the tip level is faster, more than 70%. We can save energy, more than 70%. And even if the shape, of course, is not close to the natural system, by this comparison, we demonstrate, in fact, that this is the reason for which also the natural root can penetrate in soil. So we close the back loop to biology. But of course, nature is much more complex than this, because roots penetrate not only vertically in soil, they can create a band, and they can, as I said, follow or escape from environmental stimuli, they can avoid the obstacle, and so on. And doing that, of course, they grow, but they grow in a differential way. So they add more cell in one side with respect to the other side in order to create a band in soil. So this was very difficult, so we spent more than 1 year trying to understand how to implement this differential growing in our robot. And at the end, we developed a system that is based on a 3D printer approach. So we, in fact, use, instead of a normal filament, we use a thermoplastic material, a PLA, normally used in the 3D printed machines, and we add in the tip a thermoresistor, so we can reach, 200 degrees in a few seconds, in 5 seconds, so the material becomes sticky and can adhere to the previous layer. And in order to have the bending, so what we can do is add more material in one side with respect to the other side, like in the natural root, or we can control the velocity of deposition. The effect is the same. We have a bending. The way, the direction growing is given by the sensors that are integrated in the tip, so different sensors that we develop, a soft sensor for touch on the tip, so also the robot can avoid obstacle, soft sensor for humidity, but also chemical sensor for nitrogen, phosphate, pH, gravity, temperature, and so on. And for each sensor, we have a tropism associated, like in the natural root. So the growing, of course, is fundamental. We test the performance of our system both in air and in soil, in an artificial soil that is a granular soil. And we simulate in air the pressure of soil adding weight up to 6-10 kilo. And what we observe in the granular medium is that there is, in fact, a bending by this differential growing. But there are many other movements that we can imitate, as I said before, growing, of course, but there are other movements that are based on metabolism, so they are active. In many cases, they are associated to fast movement, as I said before, especially in carnivorous plants. And in this movement, osmosis is very important. So we want to use the water flux to generate an actuation, a movement. And this is an example, as I said, of the Oneamus scipula, that is a perfect machine because they have 3 tactile hairs inside the leaves. When a prey touches one hair and then after 20 seconds touch the second hair, this is in fact the triggering for closing the leaves. So this is what the evolution has selected as the best time and best probability to have the prey inside the leaves. Or the release of pollen. These are another carnivorous plant that is deeply based on the turgor effect. So our idea is actually to investigate this natural hardness in plants, so the way in which they change the stiffness without any muscle contraction, but given by the presence or not of water. And so we develop, in fact, starting by a simple mathematical model in which we extract the key parameters in terms of time scale around 1 minute. That is the time that we have also in the natural system when is a poor osmosis, forward osmosis. 10 millimeter length scale and 20 Newton of force, so very high force. And this is the actuator. So we have 2 chambers, one for the water, the other one for the osmolyte, that is, in this case, sodium chloride. And then we have a semi-permeable membrane and a bulging membrane to demonstrate the movement, to have an actuation. And so this is very simple because it's completely passive. The triggering is given by adding water in the system. And so immediately start the reaction and the osmotic principle. So what we have after 1 minute, as I say, the maximum 2, we have the actuation. And what we did, we developed several prototypes to demonstrate again the features and how we can use this kind of actuator. So we can have a faster movement, like in the release of pollen of carnivorous plants when there is a preloaded mechanism, or we can have a slower movement just to raise, for example, 2 kilogram bean, just with the bulging membrane. So this is very effective. We are starting to investigate this osmotic actuator also for the drug release. But the point is that this actuator is not reversible. And in many applications, we need reversibility. So what we try to do is a new system, also based on this concept of osmosis. So we have 2 chambers, the semi-permeable membrane, but we can control because we add active carbon electrode, we have a soft body, and we can control the release and absorption ions by low voltage source. And so what we try also to do is integrate an embodiment to this actuator. So we have, in fact, a tendril-like, a soft tendril-like system inspired, again, by plant, in particular by climbing plant. So these are very amazing living systems because the strategy is to use other plants, other support to grow faster. So they don't spend energy in creating the trunk, but they use this energy and go faster, reaching the light. And so many of the plants are, in fact, a climbing plant, and they have many different strategies to anchor, like a spine or adhesive pads, but also tendril. So they use this arm, if you want, a soft arm. They can change the stiffness. They can coil and uncoil around the support because they have a very sophisticated tactile sensor. So they can select the support. And based on that, we develop this tendril-like system that is, in fact, completely soft. We can have also coil and uncoil. We can obtain this 500 degree in rotation in 26 minutes, apply 1.3 volt source. And we can also control the stiffness, depending by the presence or not of water. So what we have is a soft arm that, as I said, can anchor to different substrate. And this is a way in which we can also integrate to other robots for anchoring or for manipulating objects. And there are also other movements that we want to explore in plants. In particular, these are completely passive movement. Sorry, I show you again. And this is very, I mean, for me, fascinating, especially because we can have a movement without any metabolism. They are completely passive. These organs are dead, but they continue to move thanks to the arrangement of the materials inside the cell wall. The capability of this material to interact with the external environment, especially humidity change. So there are materials that absorb and desorb water. And there are materials like microfibrils that, depending by the arrangement inside the cell wall, they create a movement. So you can have flying, bending, drilling, soil, and so on. These are completely passive, so the energy only at the design level, so when these materials are created. And from an artificial point of view, this is very effective because the idea that we have in mind is to create a material that can show multifunctionality. So they can work as a sensor and the actuator at the same time. So the idea is to reduce the energy that we need in many cases for the movement and for the control. So what we do is this hygromorphic actuator in which we have a soft material based on P.PSS that absorbs and desorbs the water, and PDMS, that is the material that drives the movement. So when the PDMS and drive the movement, so we have a bending, and the other layer can absorb the water, and so we have a modification in the shape. But because the P-dot is also conductive, we can also apply a current, so there is a desorption of water by Joule effect, we can a consequent bending. So we can also control the movement. It's not just passive. And so what we have, we develop a different kind of devices, again, to test the performance. We can have softer hands for manipulation of a small object. And you can see the effect of the temperature. So when increases the temperature, there is the release of water. We have a movement. Or you can have a completely passive response. So as I said, this material can work as a sensor and actuator at the same time. But what we did recently, we also discovered that plants can generate energy. If properly stimulated, in particular the leaves, what happens is that there is a conversion by triboelectric effect. So there is a conversion from mechanical energy in an electrical energy. And this is given by the double layer of the cuticle that work as a sort of capacitor. So what we observe is that when it's actually stimulated by using, in particular, soft material like EcoFlex, so the system doesn't work if you touch by hand, but only with the soft material. And of course, what is important is also the force that we apply, the frequency, the area of contact, and also the leaves. But what we observe in many different species, this generation energy is present in all the species that we test. But what we see, what we observe is a rhododendron, just stimulating a rhododendron leaf, we can power the 100 LAD. So our idea is to use in the future this natural energy to supply the robot, especially if the robot have to work, of course, for a long time in a real condition. And what we observed, this is very interesting for us, that also the natural wind generated this energy. So now the question is, what is the meaning of this energy? Is just an effect of the materials, or there is also a biological meaning? So what we are trying to investigate is also, the role, or the potential role of this generation energy. But what we observe is that by integrating electrode in the leaves and in the root, if you stimulate the leaves, the signal travel very fast to the root. So we would like to see if a sort of communication in plants. And the last point that I would like to mention you about the reason for which we are investigating plants is about what is called the intelligence. It's very difficult to describe the behaviors and the capability of plants because there is no terminology for them. The terminology is mainly for animals, and so very often it's difficult for us to accept that a plant is intelligent, in fact. But the first scientists that talk about intelligence in plants were Charles Darwin and his son, Francis, in The Power of Movement of Plants. So they describe the tip of the root as a sort of a brain of lower animals that can perceive the stimuli in the environment and then take a decision about the direction of growing. And so we start by this principle, and in particular, our idea is to start from the DNA of the plant. So plants have this priority in following or escaping from target, so gravity, humidity, chemicals, but this priority, of course, dynamically changes on the basis of the needs of the plant, on the basis of the external condition. So what we want to implement is a phenotyping in our robot that is based on this changing priority. And also, we consider the memory of the uptake for all the routes. And what we obtain is a sort of emergent behavior. So at the end, the robot decides the direction of growing on the basis of the external environment, or the basis of the need that we simulate in the algorithm. And this is the robot. So we have a trunk in which we put the electronics, we put the material for the growing. We have several branches with leaves, artificial leaves that are inspired by the material that I mentioned before, that can work as a sensor actuator at the same time, so a multifunctional material, and several roots with several sensors. And so we have the tropism associated, for which the movement can be negative. In the case of the thermotropism, for example, is the response to touch. And also the robot, as the natural route, tend to avoid the obstacle and moving away. Or hydrotropism is positive, so they tend to grow to water or chemicals because it is fundamental for, of course, for the photosynthesis. And of course, there are in this route, so the tropism associated and the capability to penetrate, as I said, growing in soil, so layer by layer deposition. And then what we implement is this distributed intelligence, this collective behavior that is not necessarily inspired by swarm intelligence in animal. Of course, what we can do with this kind of robots, there are different kind of applications that we have in mind. First of all, monitoring, as I said, this was the initial idea. Depending by the sensor that we integrate in the tip, we can have a different tropism. And we started this research with an European research project. But then now we have a new project that for agriculture. So the goal is to develop this robot for agriculture, and so the operator can receive the information from the robot about the quality of soil. But we started with a small funding by the European Space Agency because, of course, they are interested not only in the exploration capability, of course, this is very important, but also in the ability of plant to anchor the structure. So they first anchor the plant, and that plant can start to grow. And anchoring is, of course, a very crucial point that they need to solve. In the future, of course, what we are doing, especially with the climbing plant, we are developing a system that can move under debris. So this is the new trend. And we can, of course, add the camera or other sensor to recognize a survivor. And what happens is the operator never loses the contact with the tip, because we create an hollow shaft, and so we can also add wires for this kind of operation. And in the long-term perspective, of course, this is much more difficult, but the idea, we are working with a medical doctor, is to having this growing robot for medical application. Because, as I say, the growing at the tip level means that there is no pressure at the tip, so there is no structure for the tissue, no damage, and no pain for the patient. So in the future, we would like to work also in this direction. So, in general, what the trend in soft robotics, what we are, with the community, we are trying to do is pushing new abilities in the robot. So abilities that are given by the fact that we are exploring new materials, new abilities inspired by living systems. So we can have a robot that are able to deform, to adapt to the environment, to self-heal, or to grow, as I said. So this is one of the trends trend of soft robotics. But of course, there are many aspects that we need to solve. And the community discussed about what are the main point in soft robotics, starting by bioinspiration. As I said at the beginning, the goal is not copy. We need to understand when biology, when nature is really necessary, and try to simplify the mechanism and try to translate only the principle, as also we said during the plenary talk. And so bioinspiration is a critical way, so we need to implement only what is needed. But also, of course, we need to implement new rules for controlling the robot, and one of the solutions is a sort of co-development body and brain. And another aspect that we need to consider now at design is, in fact, the role of the environment. So because the living system operate in a certain way, because they live in a specific environment, and this is exactly what we want to consider also for our robot. So we needed to face a lot of challenges in terms of fabrication, energy form, and also simplification mechanism, as I said, and nature can help in this way. So just to conclude, what is also needed is not only technology. What we need is to break the wall among the disciplines, because we need a different kind of expertise to develop this kind of robot. So not only engineering, but many different kind of discipline are needed here. And this is also very important, because with this complex problem, we can also try to train new research and new young students that are trained to face complex problems, and they can, in fact, become the scientists and entrepreneur of tomorrow. So I would like to thank my colleagues that work with me on these topics, and the Finds Agency, and of course, all of you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara. Fascinating, wasn't it? We have time for a few questions, if there are any. Just raise your hand. It's a big room. Yes, we have one there.
Hi, great talk, thank you. I had a question about the geometry of the root in terms of the diameter. I see it's a relatively large diameter compared to a plant. So, and I saw the sensors are small, so I was just wondering what is restricting you from making it smaller, or if it was a deliberate choice to make it
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, the diameter is in the version that I show is not optimized at all. So what we start to do is try to test the principle, but in the parallel, what we are trying to do is modeling the natural roots. To understand, of course, we need to implement a compromise by the natural dimension that is really too small, and what we can obtain by the technology that we have. Of course, additive manufacturing is probably not the best, because we are quite limited by the motor that we are using now for the pulling of the filament. But at the same time, now that we are going in the real world, so in the real soil, the optimization of the sites is one of the key points. So what we are trying to do first is optimize the parameter, even the sites, even if, as I said, there is a compromise of what we can do and what is the real condition. And the sensor, not only in the tip, but if possible, especially for the tactile feedback, also in the body. So what we are doing also for the search application is try to deposit material with functionality, with sensing functionality. So the goal is also to find a new material for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, one on the back.
Hello, thank you for your talk. Really enjoyed it. Just wondering what the big challenges going forward are going to be in the specific modules that you're looking at. Is it going to be in the materials themselves and actually being able to have them survive in real-world environments? Will it be power, or will it be the actuation?
So you talk about the material in the future, if I well understood. Which kind of problem? So one of the idea, but of course, is there are many problems that we need to solve first. But one of the idea that we have in mind is because we need to use this robot in a real condition soil, is also using material that after a while can be biodegradable. So you don't need to recover the robot. Of course, this is again in the long perspective, but could be something that you lose in the environment, and they send the data. Of course, it's a screening, it's not a quantitative data, but it can be very useful to understand the quality of soil, because this kind of environmental analysis now are quite missing. So this could be one of the future options for the robot.
Sorry, I've got another question. Since you're in Queensland and you're aware that we have a really nice reef up north.
Sorry, can you speak?
How's that? Since you're in Queensland and you might have noticed we've got a very nice reef up north, have you had any consideration for applying this in littoral zones where corals and other living creatures could actually be, just to do exactly the same analysis that you were presenting before, but also to make changes to try and save the reef, or continue growing corals or encourage growth?
This could be really, of course, one of the applications for the moment that we didn't think about. But of course, if you can develop a robot that can grow in a very, as I said in the beginning, in a very safe way, for the environment. You could embed in sensor depending by what you want to do in the real environment. And so this could be one of the preservation of other species could be one of the of the application. They really depend by what we embed in the robot. The robots are based on principle that are quite eco-friendly. So the robot is just designed to not destroy the environment. So it can be used in all the situations which we can monitor or preserve other species using this kind of technology, in fact.
Okay, thank you. We have one here.
Hi. In regards to the medical applications that you proposed, is there any residue in the actual filament as it burrows through the intestines, or is it just dependent on a certain application?
Yeah, the medical application is one of the most difficult applications that we have in mind. This is it's very nice because it's an idea from the medical doctor. It's not our idea. And what they said is that we need 1 centimeter in diameter. This is the specification. But of course, and it's perfect in terms of movement inside the body, no pain for the patient. What happens is a retraction when you have to remove the endoscope, like in the natural system, in the current system. The difficulty is, of course, in reducing the size, as we said before, but more than this, in the deposition of the material. Because now we are using temperature, because we are using PLA, that is a commercially available material, so they are not very good in terms of mechanical properties, but they need a very high temperature, even if for a few seconds. So we need to develop, and this is what we are doing with my group. There are material scientists in the group. What they are trying to do is developing material that need a very low temperature, quite environmental temperature, in order to become then sticky, because this is the point, to be quite flexible, but at the same time maintaining the structure. This is the crucial point, of course. And the environment helps in this, because of course there is the tissue that, like in the soil, that maintain the structure, but now again the materials are the crucial aspect.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more on the right, on the back. think this will be the last one.
Thank you for that. That was really inspiring. I have a question about the materials that we use. So typically, all of these actuators are reactive. Is there any way we can move forward in kind of higher intelligence, like planning?
Yeah, as I say, that this is exactly the future trend, because as I showed, we have intelligent material, especially as a sensor and actuator, but the point is to use this material for growing. So we try to combine the material that I show for the leaves, also functionalize it with the other particle, nanoparticle, to be conductive at the same time, but we can also perceive, for example, humidity, that is very important. And the other parameter that we would like to perceive is a touch, especially for the climbing plant. So what we are trying to do now is merging this smart material with a growing additive manufacturing approach, in order to have this more functionality in the robot, and not just the inert material, because the PLA doesn't have any sensing properties, but functionalize in order to have at least a touch and the humidity.
Okay, with that, we thank Barbara again.
Use. So typically,